Hello and welcome to the launch of ISG's new insight and research report, which is called Sustainable Buildings Monitor, Redefining Value. Today I'm joined by Peter Kelly and Zoe Price. Now, before we go into the report, what I'd really like to do is look at the economic context, which is really the foundation of why we've produced this piece. If you look at the post-pandemic valuation on property, things are not as predictable as they once were. And we've seen homeowners now facing a 5% reduction in the value of their property. There's been a re-evaluation of business rates. And for owners of commercial property, there are changes in legislation around EPC ratings, which could mean that some owners face having a stranded asset unless they can improve the carbon emission performance of that building. Then on top of that, when you think about cities, we're no longer all a slave to the office Monday to Friday. So the footfall in the major cities that everybody used to depend on is no longer dependable. And then of course, we know there are macroeconomic factors such as the conflict in Ukraine. We're still navigating our way out of Brexit. And there's the whole levelling up agenda here in the UK. So when I think about all of that, I'm sure that asset valuation needs to change in line with those economic conditions. And that's really the point of the research. The point is to launch a conversation that is broader than just pound size alone. The research has been produced for a number of stakeholders. So if you work in government, it's designed to help you to make your policy decisions or also your regional prioritization decisions. If you're a developer, it will give you a framework to have a broader conversation with planners, with councils, with decision makers, which could actually speed up the process of getting a property built and produced and up and running, but hopefully lead to better outcomes for all stakeholders. And if you're an employer, it will help you to make decisions around where to base your portfolios, both for the good of your customers and your workforce. Now, we don't want to throw away everything we already know about asset valuation, but this is about augmenting the conversation and, I hope, having better conversations which will benefit all stakeholders, whole communities, and essentially, ultimately, the environment. So with all of that as background, Peter, if I can ask the first question to you, I'm just interested in how ESG has been built into the new model in the report.
Thanks, Richard. I think we need to acknowledge, as the built environment, that we don't actually incorporate ESG metrics into how we value property at the minute. And this report, in terms of the methodology and the data, attempts to try and challenge that and change that through introducing three key pillars. The first is environment and social. The second is people and workplace. And the third is the finance and commercial. And we must acknowledge that there are some challenges with that in terms of the data and how easy it was to get data that applies to all of the local authorities across the UK. But I personally think if we do start to embrace this new thinking, then it really gives us an opportunity to see value where perhaps we haven't seen value before.
Okay, that's interesting. And in terms of all the results that were there where we could get the data, what surprised you?
Well, that's a good question, Richard. There's a really good graphic in about the middle of the report that I think really neatly encapsulates what we're trying to show with this data and what we're trying to show with this report. And what it shows is, compared to traditional rateable value, the second graphic shows how much different that picture is across the UK if you introduce these types of metrics, how much more balanced it is and how much more holistic we really show value across the UK. So that's was not surprising, but a really good outcome. It was really good to see North Wales score really well when it comes to environment and social. And then perhaps the most surprising results were in the finance and commercial, where, funnily enough, the City of London didn't get the top score when it comes to that particular metric, which may be surprising to some. Conversely, cities like Dundee and York scored really well.
So all of that really supports the whole levelling up agenda, doesn't it, that we're seeing happening, which is great. And in terms of just the main takeouts from the report, how would you summarise that?
I suppose I've kind of mentioned it really, that it's that holistic approach to the country as a whole. And I think the stakeholders that you've mentioned in your introduction can really take away that perhaps there's value where it hasn't ordinarily been seen. And places like the Midlands, Wales, etc., the North East in particular, there's great value there for developers, etc., that are looking for areas that are perhaps haven't been seen as traditionally areas likely to invest in. And so that's a really good takeaway from the report, and something that I would wholeheartedly suggest everyone downloads and has a look for themselves.
Fantastic. Thank you, Peter. Zoe, if I can come to you, I'm just interested in what you're seeing commercially and how that is affecting market behaviours.
Yeah, thanks, Richard. I think if we look at the report, it makes absolute sense if you look at it from a societal or a commercial angle. And I think what's really exciting about the report is it gives the whole levelling up agenda a different way to look at an asset strategy. So if you could hang an asset strategy around our framework, you've got a different way to start attracting talent, to look at how you value that investment and how you look at making the right decisions. And if we look at construction, it's specifically one of our key customers in that sector. The government recently launched their property strategy, which is an 8-year view of how they drive efficiency and how they look at how they rebase across the UK to improve public services. And that really links into that strategy. So I think our report is consistent with the government property strategy. It picks up on elements of the construction playbook. If we look about the gold standard for frameworks, it's bringing all of those elements together, and it's given us a different way to look at outputs and also to drive that levelling up agenda. So we know we need a catalyst to look at the estates differently and address inequalities and talent. And I really think the report gives us that opportunity. I think what it does focus on, again, is about the collaboration and the importance of the public sector and the private sector working together to give us a different result. And if you think about the potential to work with stakeholders, so if we engage with governments, with local authorities, with developers, with consultants, with owners, with funders, this really can make us better prepared for emerging markets. And then when we start to look at some of the geographical trends, it starts to bring in the free ports and emerging sectors. So it really does give us a different way and a different lens to look at all those opportunities. So it's hugely exciting.
Thank you, that's great. And are you seeing parallels between the findings in the report and the actions of first movers?
Yeah, absolutely. So Peter mentioned around those geographical trends, and if I think about where we're seeing those, so I know Wales came out as a top performer there for environmental and social, and we're definitely seeing that across the education estate and one of the big regeneration projects we're doing in Central Square. An interesting fact was, despite the status as being a super city, I think there was lots that London could learn from that. So I think they only had one of the local authorities in the top 10 in terms of environmental factors. So there's lots of learning across the UK there. And also, if we look at some of the areas just outside London, so the M25, we're seeing growth in new sectors. So film is a booming area. So we're actually seeing evidence of the report already in existence. But I think it gives us more that we can focus on. So if we move to the North East and we look at free ports and how we could use this report, and it shows us that the North East is one of the best places to be building because of not only construction costs, but of labour costs and skills, it starts to put tangible evidence around that. So I think without what we've seen before and that collaboration, the map definitely gives us wider opportunity going forward, and it means we can look at sustainable investment from a very different angle, but support that by evidence and data, which has always been the challenge. So I think that's the key benefit. I think the next question is, how can we better use planning to help enforce some of these decisions and bring that whole skills agenda in. So my hope is that the report starts people thinking differently to look at investment and and asset strategies in a different way, and to really look at that levelling up agenda and how we can achieve that. And I think it gives us a really good start in that space.
Thank you, Zoe. That's great. Well, it's clear to me that we are at an inflection point. And really what I'm hearing is that we need a multi-dimensional approach to what is return on investment. I guess my hope is that it leads to greater collaboration across the industry. But realistically, this is the start of the conversation, and that is precisely what the report is meant to be. If you'd like a copy of the report, do click on the download link. And apart from that, thank you for joining us today.